You're listening to the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, procurement pro, digital nomad, and ProcureTech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, hello, and a very warm welcome to another episode of the ProcureTech podcast, where every week we bring you everything that is fun, innovative, and exciting in the digital procurement space. And this week, as you know, I'm generally a fan of best-of-breed solutions, especially for non-enterprise businesses, because I preach simplicity and agility and have long really been an advocate of great UX, high levels of adoption, and sort of more of a done is better than perfect philosophy. But with that being said, we have to acknowledge that a lot of businesses who were early movers on their digital transformation will already have implemented some of the established suites. And it can also be argued, obviously, that companies above a certain size, especially in the enterprise space, can see the benefits of having a single access point for both stakeholders and suppliers alike into their central procurement ecosystem. And with many companies facing a decision whether or not to replace their existing legacy tech, or whether they should go best of breed, or should they even stick to an approach of using a suite at the core of their digital procurement system and then add things onto it, it does kind of beg some wider questions. So we're going to tackle that subject today. And my guest on the show, Jim Bourreau, is CEO of Jaggaer. So Jim, welcome to the ProcureTech podcast.
James, thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So yeah, you've come into the dragon's den a little bit with me being a bit of a best of breed fanboy, but I appreciate you reaching out and taking the time, because I think we love to get sort of diverse solutions on here and to really chew the fat around what's going on. And you're in a tough market right now, right? So I mean, when best of breeds are gaining market share like they are right now, and with the top two sort of suites by market share in your segment really starting to consolidate and leverage their position, how do you carve out your niche?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I guess I would start by saying, you know, we probably view the world a bit different, right? So first of all, look, we're a huge fan of innovation, right? And you get innovation by people doing creative things. And that oftentimes requires niches in certain marketplaces that technology companies can take advantage of. So, you know, you made an interesting point right at the beginning of your podcast here, where, you know, what do people want to go best of breed? Do they want to go full suite? I've been doing this for 30 years now, and while best of intentions are maybe to go one way or the other, inevitably you're always going to have a mix of technologies in there. Even the biggest companies that I'm aware of that have full suite end to end, the minute that they buy another entity, they've got a different environment in there. And so you also touched upon another, what we consider really important point early on, which is the experience. Because at the end of the day, whether it's full suite, best of breed, or what have you, the experience is going to drive user adoption. User adoption is going to provide return on investment. And that's where we would encourage our customers to focus in on.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. So what do you see the landscape looking like then going into the future for established suites like yourselves? Do you feel that it may go a little bit more modular and you will have to adapt by perhaps selling individual modules as well as a full suite?
Yeah, well, I will tell you what we are doing here at Jaggaer. There's two important initiatives with it we're working on. So first of all, I would say as a general rule of thumb, the reason why full suite um, exists out there in the first place is it's expensive to tie things together. To tie, best of breed. I mean, that pendulum has shifted back and forth over the years many times over. But at the end of the day, you sort of nailed it. Is simplicity. What do a couple things that Jaggaer is very much focused on. One is creating an environment and an ecosystem of partners around us, and that allows people to have sweet systems while being able to plug niche innovative vendors into that quickly, easily, without requiring a lot of IT. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Tealbook, who we do quite a bit of work with, is a good example. We know that a lot of our customers have a need for supplier augmentation of data, and so we plug Tealbook directly into that. EcoVadis in the ESG space is another good example of that. And so where Jaggaer is spending our time and effort is on creating that app store, which allows our customers to not only share third party modules and products that can easily be plugged in. But we're also working on something we call Jaggaer Compose. And what Jaggaer Compose is all about is allowing our customers and partner community to build out business processes that are specific to a niche or specific to an industry that they can share amongst one another. And we believe that will completely change the game on how people interact with these systems today.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of good points there. The making it more bespoke and more adjustable or adaptable to different industry sectors in terms of the way people put their processes together is one. But I wanted to touch a little bit on what you said around App Store. SAP, Ariba, and Cooper have obviously been quite prominent in bringing this out. So is that something that you're already in the process of deploying, or is it more ad hoc as you partner with different solutions like the Tealbooks and the EcoVadises that you mentioned?
Yeah, so it will officially be launched at the end of our Q2 here, but we've got companies that are already using it, like a Tealbook. But the key for us is to scale and to make it easy. I've been doing this for a long time, and I will acknowledge Salesforce has done a really good job of this, right? I can go on to Salesforce and I can plug in a third-party module for a specific niche that I want to do and be up and running by lunchtime. So that's the objective of where we're going is, the procurement space. I mean, there are many different adjacent markets to the procurement space, but they have to be easy to be able to plug in. That means API enabling your entire infrastructure, so that you can easily plug those modules in with literally the click of a mouse and be up and running in a matter of minutes. Time to value is critical in today's SaaS environment. People want to be up running immediately.
And if they do that, Jim, do you see a future of where customers may be able to take more of a pick and mix approach? So, I mean, let's just give an example. If they feel that an external spend analytics program or SaaS product is stronger than what you can offer, or if they want certain features, is that something that they could, as part of their RFP, specifically request that they don't want to take the full suite with the spend module and plug in a best of breed instead of that, likewise for any other part of the application too?
Yeah. Well, clearly you're asking a question that for any CEO, nobody likes to forego business anywhere. But the simple reality is that's how the vast majority of entities buy. I mean, if they have something up and running, whether they got it from years ago or they got it through an acquisition or what have you, oftentimes there's no reason why they should part with those. Now, I would make the argument that in order to get the most out of your platform, it's more advantageous for those all to be seamlessly together. But that being said, it's just not the reality that we live in. And so, one of the things that Jaggaer has done is, we you'll notice we've spent a lot of time and money and effort on our autonomous commerce platform. That's really important because what that implies is that the way that you get autonomy is through machine learning and artificial intelligence, but you have to be able to do that through systems that are not your own as well, because that's where you get a true autonomous environment. You're never going to own everything. So how do you take information like from Tealbook, like from EcoVadis or what have you, as well as your own, as well as from maybe somebody else's spend analytics application, what have you, and work it into your machine learning so that you can apply and proactively push recommendations to a user community that may or may not live within your application. To us, it's all about the experience. And if I can get my users to have a great experience and get that value back, that's where we're going to be focused on.
Hey, so just a quick interlude to let you know about procurementsoftware.site. This is a new website that I recently launched to give you, the listener, a free to access intuitive guide to digital procurement technology. You can filter on a multitude of different criteria and pick out a short list of procurement software solutions that are relevant to your business and your needs in less time than it takes to boil an egg. No corporate subscriptions, no complex jargon, and definitely no pay-to-play model. We are a completely transparent, open book, and we really want to get your feedback on what we can really do to make this user experience better and constantly improve so as we're providing value to you. Check out procurementsoftware.site, and now let's get right back to this week's podcast. And that's the key, isn't it? Because with the best will in the world, you just can't be everything to everyone in today's landscape. If we take a simple example, IKEA make perfectly good kitchens, but you probably wouldn't buy your cooker or your white goods from them, and you'd put in a Bosch or a Neff or whatever the North American brand is that's on vogue at the moment. And it's kind of similar with this, isn't it? That you're going to have your core functionality in a suite that you do well, and some of them do it better than others, right? That's a competitive marketplace, but you're always going to have certain niche requirement. I mean, contract lifecycle management or contract authoring and approval is another one. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute when we look at acquisitions that you've recently done. But that's a great example, isn't it?
That's a really good example, and I'll let's expand upon the contract for a second. So interestingly enough, people will make that argument quite a bit, right? Contracts is adjacent market, and sometimes it can be, sometimes it's not. But interestingly enough, we acknowledge that, and we have spent a lot of time and effort making our contract management application very usable, very easy for average user to navigate. Interestingly enough, the minute that we acknowledge, okay, we can open this environment has to be able to work with anybody. Lo and behold, what happened is you started focusing on that customer experience. Interestingly, Jaggaer is the only full suite vendor that shows up in that Magic Quadrant. What's interesting about it is you kind of drop the need to focus on what I call forcing people to put your contract module in just because you have to have it, and focus on the experience. What ends up happening is people will gravitate to the experience that gets them that return on investment. And so that's where we're honing in on, is that user experience and the analytics on top of it. And, if that ends up being our contract management suite, great. If it's not, that's okay too, but we're going to, you referenced DocSkip a minute ago. So we made that acquisition for analytics. We can actually take those analytics and apply them to third-party contracting systems, because that's what the customer need is.
What drives your strategy then around staying on top of innovation? How would you then decide whether you would go out and acquire a company, or whether you would do something like what you've done with Tealbook and EcoVadis and just have a strategic partnership?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of things that we view that truly differentiate us. One is it's got to be networked, right? And so that means you've got to work with all different suppliers, partners, Internet of Things, buyers, etc., in a connected environment. Two, you have to layer that intelligence across the user experience, not the platform. That's a substantial difference, right? Because that implies that sometimes that data is going to come from your application, sometimes it's not. Thirdly, comprehensive. And so when we think about comprehensive, what we're really thinking about is not a comprehensiveness of our application, but the comprehensive of the user experience. If I follow a workflow from start to finish through a B2B application, am I improving that workflow? And in some cases, when we create our app store, some cases it makes a lot of sense for those third-party applications to stay third-party applications. In some cases, it makes sense to pull those in and have them become part of our environment through merger acquisitions. It depends on the niche from which those operate in, and what the contribution is to both the user experience as well as us from a financial perspective. The last one I'll throw in there is extensibility, right? So when we're thinking about what truly differentiates Jaggaer, is how do you extend our application either through our own modules or through third-party modules? And if one of those doesn't work, again, I'll go back to Jaggaer Compose. How do I allow my partners to create? You use the word bespoke. I'd try to avoid that word because that tends to lend towards expensive. But but how do you create? Here's the challenge in the SaaS environment today. Everybody wants an application that works just for them, but on which implies custom. But they also want quick time to value. And so what Jaggaer Compose is all about is allowing people to tailor. So the word I'll choose, tailor their application to either their industry, their process flows, their environment, without breaking the system when it comes to a multi-tenant SaaS upgrades. And we have spent a lot of time ensuring that doesn't happen. There are other vendors, I won't name names, in our space who have done a pretty good job of that business process experience, and customers love it for about 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden they have to start upgrading and they're stuck, and now they're back in 1990 technology. And so that was very important to us, is to make sure that we could do that in a multi-tenant SaaS environment.
Do you also invest into up and coming startups that you see as being particularly innovative, so as you've still got some skin in the game in certain areas that may not be core features for your product, but where you want to keep a vested interest?
We would do that by way of our partner ecosystem in our app store, is how we would do that. And oftentimes we'll do, the relationships that we frame with those are oftentimes either revenue sharing or, from a support perspective, ensuring that, the customer has one touch point for support, which implies an investment on our part. in more of a revenue share model, and that's how we would typically do it.
Got it. Yeah. How do you see the balance between features and cost in terms of where the market's going? Because suites have always historically been geared towards enterprise level businesses. Are you starting to see now more of a strategy develop downstream as mid-market businesses are starting to digitize? And, do you see that with your solution? I mean, to some extent, I guess with all suites, they're going to be priced out of the market at the very bottom end. But what sort of annual turnover would a company need to typically have for Jaggaer to be an attractive solution?
Yeah, it's a good question. As you can imagine, it kind of depends on the industry and the type of spend that's going through the application. But I'd say as a general rule of thumb, something with a 250, 300 million turnover would be sort of what I call the entry point where it would make logical sense to start looking at a true platform environment. We have some that would be lower than that, but it would be something like startup pharmaceuticals where they've got very specific needs for what they do. I'll give you an example. We've got pharma companies who have scientists that need to search in a marketplace for compounds based on a chemical structure. So we actually give them the ability to go in and create a chemical compound or search for a chemical compound so that it can lend itself to a specific application. That's a very unique thing that we provide for our pharmaceutical companies. So you can the need for that drops way down as these some of these companies are getting going, and a lot of pharmas, what'll happen is they start in that incubator stage where that's a need, and then all of a sudden they either sell out to an AstraZeneca or Pfizer or whoever, and so they end up having to scale very quickly.
Yeah, and let's also not forget that it's a super profitable industry in most cases as well. If we're comparing it against more traditional manufacturing, like automotive or machine construction or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. James, I'll give you another interesting stat here. So a lot of the vendors in our space, right, they go toe to toe in the indirect materials, and there's a lot of cost savings to be had in indirect materials for sure. But interestingly enough, indirect materials only makes up about 25 to 30% of corporate spend. Yeah. So direct materials is which we are the strongest player in the marketplace, and it's a very good space for us, and something that we view as clearly differentiated, relative to our peers.
Yeah, that's a really good point actually, because a lot of suites do tend to have or even solely concentrate on indirect spend. So having that flexibility to do both is certainly is certainly an advantage against some of the competitors in your space. Yeah, 100%. I mean, poor data is the elephant in the room. Let's talk about this a little bit, because it's kind of no longer a viable excuse to postpone digital transformation. And we mentioned Tealbook earlier on, which this is obviously the wheelhouse that they play in. Having your vendor master data all in one place should theoretically be a big selling point for any suite over best of breed. So other than what you've done with your Tealbook partnership, what else are you doing around the data management piece to stay ahead of the curve? I'm thinking particularly around vendor master data and vendor intake, because that's, as a procurement pro myself, that's something I've often found to be quite bureaucratic and very admin heavy, to stay on top of that.
Yes, so I will say it is one of the toughest aspects of making these work correctly, and where it usually comes. I mean, look, when you have an up running operational environment where the setup is complete, it's actually relatively easy, right? But getting there is the hard part, and the reason why it's hard is it's not unusual for us to have customers who have 12, 15, 20, 30 different ERP systems that they're pulling data from
Right.
initially.
Especially if they've grown through acquisition, right, as well, which is common in manufacturing.
Absolutely, right. And so that's what, we've done implementations where we've seen, you go through their supplier master, and not only do they have duplicates, but they've got vendors that are in there 7, 8, 9 times over. And the data is partially completed, and it's a real challenge. And so, what we've done is twofold, right? We've created an ecosystem of partners, whether it's Teal Book, Dun and Bradstreet, Bureau Van Dyke, what have you, that augment that. We've also done a lot of work with our partner community. So whether it's the PwCs, the Accentures, Bearing Point, Rise Nows of the world, to make sure that we have a methodology for how we're pulling that data in. And in many cases, particularly at the enterprise level, they will often have a separate MDM initiative going on that you're plugging into. Uh, we actually see that to be the case more often than people asking us necessarily to be the owner of that, and which kind of lends to your original point starting off, right? Does it make sense for someone like us to do that? Yes, we absolutely have to plug into it. Yes, we can be that, but we're not the only ones in the enterprise that need MDM data.
Yeah, very true. Where do you see enterprises fail, or where do you see them typically get frustrated or fall down when it comes to digital procurement transformation? I mean, you've like you say, Jaggaer's been around a long time in various different forms, so you've obviously got a lot of industry data and experience to have some thoughts and opinions on that.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I will say this: it depends on everybody likes to go in and sell the perfect system. It depends on where their starting point is and what kind of champions they have behind. Um, so something that we're seeing distinctly different over the course of the last 18 months, and I think it's just been a culmination of events that have led to this. Starting with COVID, and then ramping that through the supply chain issues that sometimes COVID has created. Now you got geopolitical events that are going on. And what's happened is, we tend to operate in what people times often refer to as the spend management market. Well, if I can't get the goods and services to um, allow me to make my products, that's no longer a spend management initiative. That's a revenue initiative. And so what we're seeing now is a very different environment where, whether it's a chief procurement officer or head of supply chain, they're having a seat at the table at the enterprise that spans the entire organization. And where people oftentimes historically have gone wrong is that's a procurement initiative, and let them run it. And now what you're getting is that access point to where when people are doing these initiatives, it spans across many different functional departments, and that makes a pretty material impact on the success and the adoption. And it certainly doesn't hurt that people's experiences in the B2C world have also made an impact. Right? I mean, people are
Right.
expecting to be able to go to a marketplace, buy something, and have it on their desk in the B2B space, like same day, next day. And so that's what their expectations are in the B2B world now. And Jaggaer is fully intending to deliver that. And that's what we see as that transition to autonomous commerce.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, actually, especially with younger people entering the workforce that have grown up using apps or websites like Amazon. They get to a big company and have to use an ERP system to do requisitioning and procurement, and they're thinking, why why?
I've seen it. So one of the things I love to do is if I go to a customer, I love to sit down with the users. And it's really interesting. You get I'll call it, and I've got kids that are, in their early 30s, late 20s, and they sit down at these, ERP systems and are like, what am I looking at? This is not my experience at home. And that's what they're wanting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. Where are you seeing the most in terms of business growth? Where are you seeing the most traction at the moment? Are you having more success stealing business away from existing suites when customers are looking to change, or do you still see most of your growth as greenfield?
I would say most of it's twofold. It's, as we launch our autonomous commerce, what people really want to know is, okay, great, what do I need to get there? And it's a journey map. It's a journey and a map, right? It's less often are people going to want to flip the switch all at one time. So we lay out a path for them to get the outcome that they're looking for. And so oftentimes where we're seeing our growth is, the markets that we tend to cater to tend to be fairly complex, right? So, if you've got a very simple procurement process, you may be better going something like a Coupa or something. If you've got a fairly complex environment, so higher education, public sector, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, energy, where you've got a mix of direct and indirect and nuances that require some very specific things. That's where we flourish in those markets. And so some of those are existing customers that are broadening out their capabilities to layer on intelligence, which we're seeing a lot of uptick on. And then others are sort of, still in I'll call it greenfield, but again, I pointed out 75% of corporate spend is in direct materials. And that market has historically been ERP run, and ERPs just, while they serve a certain purpose, they don't communicate with the outside world, fantastic. So,
Yeah.
we're seeing a lot of uptick in that space.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with you there. I mean, direct materials and also services procurement is an area
Mm-hmm.
that's been pretty underserved historically in ProcureTech. And I talk a lot about, mid-market and how that's going to be the next frontier. But I do think there's a lot of wiggle room as well with direct spend and also although services is really mushrooming now with the different innovative solutions that are coming on stream. Final question, Jim, you're a busy guy and appreciate your time. Where is the best place that people can find you or learn more about Jaggaer?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for asking. So clearly, our website at jaggaer.com is the best place to get all sorts of information on us. But, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter. But, we have a mantra here at Jaggaer is the customer is number one. Everything that we do revolves around that customer. So, by all means, customers can reach out to us and we'll be on top of it.
Awesome. Jim, thanks again for coming on the show. And yeah, all the best with your new app store that's just about to roll out.
Terrific. Thanks, James. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure.
So that was Jim from Jaggaer talking about how they differentiate themselves from what is quite a noisy and very, very competitive market in that space. Hope that was useful for anyone that was considering potentially what are the differences between some of the bigger suites that are out there. Just before we sign off, don't forget, if you're looking to get a complete overview of digital procurement solutions and want to filter them based on your own individual criteria, then head across to procurementsoftware.site, where I'm sure we will be able to facilitate your needs and requirements there. Thank you very much for listening. Stay safe wherever you are in the world, and speak to you again next week. Bye for now.